Connecting to the cloud. Okay. So here we are here. What are you going to research? You got to start with this headspace of, and so all of you in your little assignment will have done this. What were you thinking about would be worth researching? Any topic. And it doesn't matter what it is. I say, as long as you pick something you're interested in, you're in a good space. If you pick what you're interested in, you're able to do it. If you don't, if it's not something you're interested in, oh, I can do that. That'll be a good, easy research project. That'll get me a, so say you had a, we don't do it here, but if you had a, media does, they have a 4th year research project they got to do. So you pick one and say, oh, that'll be, I'm going to do that one because I think it'll be easy. You might find yourself very surprised because it seemed like an easy topic, but then you had to do all the reading on it. You said, ay, caramba, this is way overload because it's like labor having to pick up yet another book to read on this topic that's not very interesting. If you do research on something you like, you got a stack of books, 15 books high, you take the next one off and read it, so, ooh, that's interesting, and then you're looking, what's in the next one? You get, that goes with it, which I touched on these in the last video. Grounded theory. It's no theory at all. It's just curiosity. I'm looking to see what's going on. What am I wondering about? That's grounded approach. And I don't think I use, the word is called grounded theory. Really, I call it a grounded approach because there is no theory. Somewhere in along the line, I watch and see. So this would be back to the classroom thing. I said, what did you do in your first class, right? In that first class, when you showed up in a grounded approach is the watching, looking around, saying, oh, what's going on here? What are they doing? What's Buddy at the front doing? What are these people beside me doing? What's going on? It's just curiosity, looking around. Grounded. Ethnography. So I turn all of these into one word. Ethnography, I call that empathy. The ability to stand in your shoes. That's it. I'm going to do research from the point of view of I want to know what your life looks like. What's the limits on your life, the outside limits? What does it mean to be ethnographic? That's what it's about. Phenomenology is the idea of belief. Shared belief is what I use to understand this. So find language, find words that work for you, that if you see the word phenomenology, phenomena, you say, oh, what's that about? Phenomena. How did it get built?
Like religion, right? Religion.
So I think, yeah, religion is what we would do. If I was a phenomenologist, I'd go and I'd look at in a group of people and I go in and look, say, oh, what are they doing here? I might find out that, oh, there's this belief they all have, and that's why they're all here doing this thing. I get this idea of there's an overarching thought, a concept. For us, it's the idea that there's some value in education. So that's phenomenology. If I've got words on the different slides, you'll see words highlighted like this, either down the side or across the bottom. That means you should know these terms. You simply should know the terms. So, because they will show up on the midterm and they're important. They're also really important concepts just to grasp for the nature of the course. So you ask yourself when you're thinking about a topic, where does the idea come from? If you're committed to it, if it's something close and personal, it's going to change. So you may have some bias if it's personal, but that's not necessarily bad. You just need to check it. It's hard work, but you need to check that bias. Right now, so we're going to look at, in a few minutes, we're going to look at HIV or AIDS and people with AIDS and euthanasia. So assisted death and AIDS, put them together. Okay, so why that? Why that topic? Why? Because I know somebody, I have a friend, my brother, my father, my sister, whoever. So that, I think, if you do research on something that is attached to you, then you could use this method. So the hypothesis gets at just that. Ask yourself before you start, when you're starting to write out what you've done already, all of you have done, writing out those words, right? That one sentence, you're asking yourself, where does this idea come from? And that starts to give you a sense of what might be the variables in it. So I think it's interesting how much we are like our primary caregiver, really. But for many of us, it's our mother was our primary caregiver in our early years. And it's interesting to look at people that you know and look at their mother and say, whoa, you meet their mother and say, I know where you get that from. And I think more so mother than father. And I look at myself and I see how much of it was some point. I say, ay, caramba, I'm just like my mother. So it's things that come naturally to us because that was our norm. So I might write a hypothesis and say, oh, that's an interesting piece of life. I find that grounded approach got me there thinking about it. I said, oh, you know what? I'm going to do a research project on this. I'm going to test this. I'm going to set up maybe some interviews, some surveys, maybe some observations with people and ask them about their mother, observe their mother, find out about their mother, and then look at them and look at the behaviors they do, particularly emotional type, how you respond to emotional issues, things that come up. And I'm going to ask about that similarity because I've decided it's correct. So I'm going to come out and do an experiment to prove it. That's hypothesis. Thesis, your idea, right? You've done papers. All of you have written done a paper where you've got a sort of a thesis statement in it, or you've thought about what it's about. That's your thesis. Hypothesis, very focused, in tight, one description. So
I have one question.
Jump in. Whenever you have a question, just throw it out.
For the hypothesis, right? Because I did a statement. Is it possible to make the statement and then you're trying to prove that statement is wrong, or does your statement is what you agree with? Because I kind of did mine the opposite.
Good. So in the hypothesis, you're proving that what you wrote, the words you wrote, are correct. In the null hypothesis, you're going to prove they're false.
Okay. So
and if it's false, because you say that here's my statement, and I'm thinking in my head that I'm going to show that that doesn't work, what that leads to is, oh, there must be something else. And now we start to ask, what is that other thing? I'll come to it. I'll come back to it a bit.
Okay, thanks.
In the null. So the hypothesis is, here's what I think. Often it's here's what I believe, and I'm narrowing it in really tight. So a hypothesis in a PhD can be like a run-on sentence. It's like a whole paragraph of the hypothesis because they're going to try and remove all of the little variables to make it fit. So in that variable or that removal of variables, you start to get this different sense of issues, what we do or don't do, or so where does the idea come from? Important. If you know that, it will keep you also on track. So then the big question becomes, in all research, but in hypothesis in particular, who might be affected by your research? And who might be affected could be very remote. If I do research on you, ask you to come in, and Milgram, we can see that. I ask you to come in and engage in a research project with me. Is there some psychological harm that comes out of having you do it? Is there a physical harm, maybe, from when you look at the medical model? Medical model, they set things up. Well, oops, there was a side effect of that drug. We didn't know that, right? So I'll come back to that again, too. But in that, who might be affected? It could be if I do research on children that ultimately traumatizes them. If you buy into psychoanalytic thought, Freud, Lacan, those psychoanalysts, they'll tell you if the kid is traumatized, they may never get over it, and you might have an effect on their life and maybe on their offspring because you messed them up on their way. Early childhood looks at how do we teach children to be pro-social and nice, right? Well, if you do experiments to try and prove that, and at the same time you treat some children badly in order to show that they respond better to nice treatment, I don't get that, but people do it, then those children that you've mistreated may well be hurt, right? Like hurt for how long? So that thought about who might be affected is long-term. And the effect could be harm, it could be positive either. You're asking yourself, thinking way down the road, what might come out of what I'm doing here? Is it a good idea? So participants, there's two ways to look at our research participants: collaborators or resources. Collaborate with you. We work together, we do group assignments. That's a collaborator. That's a good headspace, that's what we want to be. The resource, I just use you as something to make, you're just something that helps me to make use of for a short period of time to get what I need. So I might do, I might do your, what was I just, car rides. I have a car. I drive past you on the way to school when the COVID thing's all over. Well, I happen to see you standing near my place at a bus stop, so I pull over and say, "Oh, you want to ride?" And beyond, once you get past Old Weird Harold offered me a ride, you get in and you decide, oh, we're going to the same class, 8 o'clock in the morning, right? So we're friendly, and let's pretend I'm 20. So we're chatty. Now we talk after class, we talk on the way home, maybe we're on social media together, WhatsApp, snappy, chatty thing, whatever, right? So we got this whole thing going on, and it's all friendly and all nice, and then my car breaks. Well, you'll wait for a week or two, but then my car isn't getting fixed, and now you say, what about that car? I say, oh, it's not going to fix. See you on the bus, though. And next thing you know, you're not on the bus. You say hello in the hall once in a while, sort of, and I'm off of all your social media. I was not your friend. I was your car ride. That's a resource. Resource is not what we want to do with people and treating people. We want to treat people nicely generally, and in research, you have to make sure you are. You can't treat them as a thing that we make use of in order to satisfy my curiosity, my research project, obtaining my PhD. Indigenous communities are interesting because this used to happen with them, with research. And not too long ago, within the last 20 years, they said, no more of this. You want to come and do research in our community, you need our permission. We're going to demand that you write it in our language so we can read your stuff. And we're going to have editing rights on it. You can't just show up and go away and write all about us, and we maybe not even write nice things. Don't get to do that anymore. So they changed themselves from being a resource for academics to being collaborators. And they got a strong decision makers, collaborators with power, which I think is quite beautiful. But it certainly undid the academic community just floating in doing research because it looked good. They were happy with it. So something to consider. Onwards, we're going to come back to that in just a minute. Here, let's look at here's a hypothesis for you. So hang on, I'm just going to dial in while I'm with you in case I move around a little bit. Zoom, I have to find Zoom. Contacts, bottom of the list, Zoom. This way, if there's a problem with my phone. Oh, never mind. Didn't work. Okay, so I'm interested in this. So somebody I know is suffering with AIDS. Now, AIDS is not HIV. It's at the end of HIV. It's like at the end of cancer. Palliative care. There's nothing we can do to treat you, to help to make it better. We can only give you something for your pain so you don't suffer as much. When you hit that point of at the end of AIDS, it's the same as if you go in, there's a lot of other Lou Gehrig's disease, cancer. There's many where diabetes can turn into this. So it's that suffering at the end. So I get that. And so call up my brother or somebody I know, and they say, you know what, I don't want this, check me out. Euthanasia, please. So if we were given that as a research project, the issue is, so the government has passed law that say euthanasia is legal. Bear in mind, the government said euthanasia is legal. Murder is not allowed in Canada. We got rid of capital punishment because if it's not okay for an individual to kill someone, it's not okay for the state to kill someone. So they also said with euthanasia, it's not okay to kill someone. So here's the little thing you learn when you start to do a research mindset we said, wow, that's good. If I get really sick, suffering's a problem for me. I don't want to suffer. I'm not so concerned about dying, but I am scared to death of the suffering on the way. So mine would be euthanasia. And I've got an agreement with my kids. It's all very clear what I want. I've told them, and I've given them a nice, easy model to determine if I hit this point, pull the plug. And if you can't, find a nice big pillow. Decide if it says, I love you or goodbye. I don't know. You get the pick. But it's, what's the last words I see on the way, right? But in it is, that truly is how I feel. So I said, whoa, euthanasia, that's good. Now it's safe for them to do it. They don't have to pretend, right? They can. So no. Because, you know, for like hundreds of years, we've been doing this, all right? Euthanasia has already gone on. In the last 100 years, we've had medicine. We had doctors with heroin. Now we call it morphine. That doctor used to come with a little black bag and show up at your farm, and you're in wicked pain. You're not going well. You've fallen off a horse. You've broken enough parts. Maybe you fell off and the cattle ran over you. You're in really bad shape. And they used to give you a little needle. And you went to sleep. And you didn't wake up. It was called, they didn't call it euthanasia. They called it medicine. But we gradually got better. And now doctors are only to preserve, you know, what they swear to is to preserve life. So when the euthanasia law comes, there's a bunch of doctors that I ain't doing that. I don't care that it's allowed. I'm not interested. I will not help somebody over the edge. And what else went with it when you look at it a little bit? So this would be if you were doing a literature review, you would go and look and see what's out there. And what's out there is it says in the House of Parliament, which you're going to do next week, look in archives. The House of Parliament says, we should allow this. And some people say, no, we don't allow murder. We don't do capital punishment because murder's not okay. This is murder. You can't do it. And others say, you know, here's a way we could word it. It's not murder if they are so close to death, they're in a state where there's no treatment available. They're suffering. They are suffering. And they're so close to death, you're just helping them a bit. You're not actually killing them. You're just helping them to prevent their suffering, and they die as a consequence. So that's what we used to do. 20 years ago, that's what they say. Well, we gave them we upped the morphine dose for their suffering, for their pain. But the doctor knows when they give you that big a dose, you're not coming back. You're not waking up again. They're aware. So it was a workaround. So the law says, you know what, those doctors won't get prosecuted anymore. If the doctor, but think about that, getting a doctor who's going to sign off and say, you're suffering and you're so close to death that it's only just a little bit of a difference. There's a lot who will not do that. So that was a couple of years ago. We brought it in and said, okay, at least we won't prosecute the doctors who help. And now, so here's the issue. So I start with an issue and then I gradually grow it. But here's where the wording in your hypothesis becomes important. And think about what you wrote. So what you were interested in and what you wrote. Would you reword the little sentence you put in? Consider this if I said assisted death AIDS patients. Oh, let me get a bigger pencil for this. Spotlight, erase format. Color. Oh, I guess blue's not good. Oh no, blue's not a good idea. Red. Big pencil. Oh, I'm so smart. What if I said assisted death? People suffering with AIDS, right? So we've got AIDS. Whoa, I'm doing this with my wrong hand. It's all because of the LSD. It lets you do everything you couldn't do before. So I'm going to write this as, here's where, and we're going to get into variables. Here's what a variable is. The independent variable. Independent. The first one. So find a way to keep it in your head. I keep it in my head by thinking about it as children. The adults are the biggest, they're first, they're independent, and the child comes underneath them as dependents. Some of you are independent now. Some of you are on the path to independence. There are things that interfere with the dependent and the independent the relationship. Are they there? So the independent variable. the first. Could be the if statement. If this, then this. That's what we're trying to prove. And we're trying to prove in it causality. This independent variable caused this dependent one. In easier terms, simpler terms, this person caused this child. These two people caused this child. Now you got to ask yourself, what's the evidence? If I wanted to do research on my genetics and said, okay, I know who my mother is because she was there when I was born, right? I'm going to take her word for it. I'm going to interview her. My source of data on who are my parents, genetic lineage, my source of data, primary source is my mother because she was there, I think. And then I say, who's my dad? So now I got that question. And this is not Maury Povich, who's your daddy, right? This is asking her who, and she can say, that guy. From a research point of view, is my data reliable? Is it valid? Could she be misleading me? Probably not. So it's probably good. I'm good. I'm going to go with it. That's what we do. We go with birth records. Go back 600 years, birth records, and think about that, how that fits in. That'll come back up next week when we think about archives. So what came first? The parent, independent, child, dependent. And every time I think about those two terms, that's what I do in my head. I say, oh yeah, which one is the parent? Which one's the one that's standalone? That's how I remember them. So the independent variable in this is AIDS patients. If AIDS, then assisted death. If, then. Okay? And it sounds stupid, and I'm repeating myself to death on this, but it's a big piece, and a lot of people mess it up. So if someone has AIDS, assisted death. So how about the language? People suffering from AIDS should have assisted death? Fair statement? Here's where bias comes into my research.
Shouldn't it be could have? Not should have.
Oh, well, why do you like could?
Because it's their choice or their family's choice.
Okay, good.
So it shouldn't be
So
should.
what? Okay, what's wrong with should? What's the potential error in should?
With should, people have the opportunity to say why they should not. But when you use the word could, like Holly said, it's more like they do have that option, like period. It's more of a statement, not like an opinion, kind of.
Okay, so there's
Like a
a
command.
statement of they're entitled to. Yeah, what else? What else could go with should? I can't believe I'm doing this better with my wrong hand than my good hand. How about should be entitled to? Does that change it?
That's kind of
So
like
much
could.
like exact. Yeah, it's good. It's exactly the same as could. So in this mindset of could or entitled to, this is about liberty, right? Choice, freedom to decide. Could this be messed up? Could this turn into should have is like, we're going to put them out?
That is it.
We don't-
I like the command.
We don't have enough room in the nursing homes, so we're going to, people with have AIDS, well, they should have assisted death because that'll give us more beds. And as crass as that is, don't think that hasn't gone on in the world. And when we look at it, and I've got you looking at the week 12, the mismeasure of man. When you read that, it should fire up because it's the things we've done using research, hypothesis stuff to be able to say, this is okay. No, there's no problem here. Joseph Mengele, the Nazi regime, the stuff he did was all, well, not because there was no entitled to, he was entitled to, they should have because it's good for us. It's craziness. Like the stuff he did was horrible. But it stemmed in a hypothesis. So the idea of research is this great honorable thing. We got to be careful with that too. Do not just blindly get led like sheep down the path to everything. So I don't like this. I would say the wording that I would use in this, if I was going to do my study, I would say people suffering with AIDS should be entitled to assisted death. And that's the statement I want to prove. So this is, let's pretend this is my research project, our research project. So how do we find, now I decide I'm going to do this and I want to go look at it. How do I find out what the patient thinks? Who do I ask?
Patient,
Good idea.
family.
Yeah. Patient's good. Family. Yeah. Who else might, oh crumbs. Who else might know?
Society.
Yeah. Who in society though? If I want to talk to somebody, who might be able to help me?
A family member who have someone going through that problem. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Family's close. Patient's close. Society's valuable. Who are outside that might be a little more distant, not related to them, might give us some insight? Let me help you. Let me move it. So I've decided to do this.
Yeah.
Doctors, good. Doctors, nurses, okay.
Mhm.
Now let's move this into a hospice. So I decided that I can get data in a hospice. There's people living there. It's a hospice specifically for AIDS patients. So I go there to speak to them, and who might be able to help me? So doctors, nurses, who else are working in that place that might know what's going on?
Reese?
Social worker.
I think
Yeah.
they tend to
Yeah.
have some written documentation about,
Okay,
like, what do they call it now? They should have some written documentation about what they want their life to be. And that,
right.
yeah, like.
The living will thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No one
How
has,
about the cleaner?
no, the cleaner cannot decide if I should be alive or not.
Well, it's not who makes the decision. Who might have good information to help me in my research to find out what people think?
Okay, I get you.
Do you think the cleaner might have heard from the patient what they like or don't like?
Maybe like the lunch lady or something.
You know what? Would they hear the family standing in the hall talking about, no, knock them off. I want the $38. I want the bank account. No, you're not getting it. I'm not, right?
They will.
Would they hear that stuff?
They will.
Yeah.
So so you're thinking about information as data, and wherever you can collect that data from, that's what you're after. So the family view might as well be the same set of people who give you that. Could the patient tell you what the family thinks?
Yeah. I'm
Sure.
pretty sure they've
If
discussed
this was
it.
me, I could tell you everything. If you asked my mother about, and I'm in, this is me, say, and I'm in that position, and you ask my mother, what do I want? She'd say, well, I know that he's talked about euthanasia, but no, he wouldn't want that. Because my mother's religious and I'm not. I was raised Catholic. She's still Catholic. I'm a retired Catholic now. So she would be stuck in that idea that if I request euthanasia and they help me, she would, in her faith, would attribute that potentially with suicide, and that means, right? My soul hangs in purgatory, it burns in hell forever. She, in her belief and her faith, could not say that I want it because it's on her. She's my mother to protect me from myself. So her view, her commentary could be biased. So we would collect data from family about what the patient thinks.
Could we also ask other patients? Because a lot of them like share rooms as well. So like they kind of talk amongst each other.
Yes, absolutely. Perfect. So you start looking and saying in research, what's my source of data? And where do I get it from? So the family view is this, patient view. I would go for, I would be cautious. I'd collect from the family, but I would be cautious to not get too caught up in, I recognize potential bias. The patient view, if I want to know what the family thinks, the patient probably could help me. Other people who overhear them, same thing. How would I gather data from the patient? Do I send them a survey?
No, you talk to them directly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interview?
Interview, yes.
Yeah, interview.
Their reaction to.
For sure. You're going to do this. This is a sensitive issue. You need to personalize it. So I think for me would be the interview. Do you think there could be some harm come out of doing those interviews?
Yeah,
How about if I
definitely.
hire all of you as my research assistant, and now I'm sending you in, and you've got to interview people who are on suffering, like they're suffering a lot, and you've got to go interview them about how they feel about euthanasia. Do you think that could be potentially become traumatic for you, or overwhelming, emotional?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back to, remember I said, you got to ask yourself who might be impacted by your research. It might be you or your research assistants. If it's a sensitive issue, and there's a lot of research on very sensitive issues. So the society view, could we do that by survey? Send a survey and ask people what they think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Sure. That's fair. That's fair, because we're trying to understand what's going on with them. So there's a hypothesis. Now let's look at the null. The null hypothesis, could I use, so the null hypothesis, I'm going to prove it's wrong. Could I take the same issue here? Could I say AIDS patients should be entitled to assisted death? And could I try and prove that's wrong?
Yeah.
This isn't what's my outcome. Could I go in with a mindset to prove that it's wrong?
Yeah. You could be like, everybody has the right to live,
Yeah.
deserves to be put down.
And you should not be allowed to choose death.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And life,
Yeah. Mhm.
no one has a right to take life.
Yeah.
Right.
Life is
So if I do that, it becomes my null hypothesis. So a big part of recognizing something as a null is you write it and you're going to prove that it's wrong. It's not, null doesn't mean you have to add in not or no or shouldn't. It can be a positive statement,
So it doesn't have to be.
but your mindset is to prove it's wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Right to life is everyone's right. Yeah. So no one has to take someone's life because it's
So
right.
could I say everyone has a right to life and try and prove that it's wrong?
Yes.
Yeah.
So your
Good.
hypothesis, John, your hypothesis and your null hypothesis could be the same statement. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay.
It's about what you're trying to do with that statement.
All right. I get it.
Some things, when we get to the null, some things we can't know. Right? When anybody seen an atom? I don't mean the guy either, like Adam and Eve. I mean, have you seen an atom? Anybody? Do
Yeah.
we believe atoms exist? How do I get rid of
Yeah.
this? Wow.
In the
Why?
Bible, you've seen
Because
it, yeah.
scientifically.
Yeah, that's
was
the guy,
proven.
Adam.
You've seen it.
How about the little atoms, though? Atoms, neutrons,
Scientifically,
protons.
they've been proven. So, like, you go into a
Oh,
microscope and you
okay.
can see them.
But now we can. But when they first came up with the idea, it was a null hypothesis. And Stephen Hawking has done the same thing again now. Hawking has gone to, I think it's nanotechnology idea. The idea, when you look at quantum physics, what he was into. In quantum physics, they were saying, there are things smaller than atoms. Atoms are not what the world is all about. It's actually something smaller now. No, protons, neutrons, electrons are all electrical stuff, magnets, blah, blah, blah.
That's more
He says, no, this does not make sense of the world. There must be something smaller. And I'm going to suggest that and I kind of buy into it, Stephen Hawking might have been the smartest person in the world
as at that time.
until a short time ago when he died. But some have seen him in that way. The brilliance of that man. So maybe he's right. Let me give you a couple of other null hypothesis things. In the null, Aristotle, 2,500 years ago. Okay, here we go. Ay, caramba. I think the video one might be better for this, but anyway, this will work. So here's the 4-minute, 3-minute, whatever, Plato thing. Plato, right? Ancient Greece comes up with a chair. He says, oh, this is a chair. And then he finds another one. Looks like a stool. And he said, oh, stool, chair. And then he sees another one, the big soft ones, right, from class. Soft ones, nice ones, the hard ones that stack up. All of those are different kinds of chairs. Plato comes up with this brilliant idea. He says, so all of these are good chairs. If there was only one good chair, then they would all be made the same, but they're not. They're made differently, and they work. So he says there must be this concept, this thing that we can't see and know. And he calls it the forms. And he said there must be a form, a concept we tap into. I tap into it and make this kind of chair. You tap in, make a different kind of chair. Somebody else makes a different chair. We all tap into this same grand concept that is imperceptible. It's beyond us. It's in the world outside of us. There's the real world, the perceptible world. We can see it, smell it, touch it, feel it, all those things. And then there's the imperceptible world we can only grasp through thought. That's Plato. Aristotle, his student. So we're still about 2,500 years ago, right? Aristotle says he's a scientist. He does hypothesis testing. He's a scientist. He works his way through and he says, I'm going to write a hypothesis. He talks about motion. Our laws here are built based on Aristotle's view of causality, who should be responsible, causality. He also looks at physical laws, gravity. And he says, look at this big rock up on the side of a mountain, doesn't move. But if you get enough men out there, and of course it would be men because it was Greek and patriarchy and way back when, right? Women didn't vote. They said the Greek democracy of everybody. Yeah, no, women and slaves didn't get to vote, and they had slaves in Greece too, just in case you're not sure. They did. This is not a new concept. So in that place, the only people who could vote ultimately were men because they were the only ones that counted as full people or something. Like, think of the craziness of that, but that's history of the world. So he says, here's a big rock, a big boulder up on the mountain, and he says, it just hangs there. Nothing's happening. But you take it and give it a little push, it starts rolling down the hill. You need some energy, some force in front of it to make it move. So what makes it move? Any of you remember the, there's that song, the little song? I love it. It's not the 10 little monkeys jumping in a bed. 10 little somethings in a bed. And the little one said, roll over. Are you with me or no?
Yeah.
Am I all by myself? Where's my ECEs? Roll over. And they all rolled over and one fell out, right? Okay. All right. So back to LSD is not a bad thing anymore. It's now appropriate. So, yeah, not really. Don't be doing that. And don't say that I talked you into it. That's not going to fly. So in it, you get that little, what caused the one to fall out of bed? Because the one beside him bumped him. Well, why did he bump him? Because he rolled over. Why did he roll over? Because the one beside him bumped him. Well, why did she bump him? Because she rolled over. Why'd she roll over? Like it just goes all the way down the line, right? At some point he says, there has to be a beginning to this. Like, it can't go on forever. So he says, there must be something that is the cause of everything, but never actually moves. So his term he comes up with is, and you don't need to learn this, or this is not on the test. This is an example of where the null hypothesis can go. So he says, there must be an unmoved mover, a thing that never moves, but causes everything else. In perpetuity, it's always there, always possible. And he says, well, thinking, concepts just exist. Back to Plato's chairness. He said, it just exists. So the concept, thinking, and what does it do? It engages in the activity of thinking, because that's what it's doing. It's a concept that's thinking about thinking. And what's it thinking about? Itself. Thinking about thinking. Don't try and learn that, because that'll drive you crazy. But in that whole, when you work through that argument he does, he proves that there must be something before all of this that makes it all work. And it must be continuing in perpetuity. Now, about, 500, 1,000 years later, the Catholic Church get exposed to it. And they call it proof of the existence of God. And that has not been undone. It is all starts in a null hypothesis. It started with the idea that we cannot make sense of things moving unless we can't. So there's got to be something beyond it, even though we can't actually see it, smell it, touch it. So it becomes, and it's interesting because the church has adopted it as proof of the existence of God. It has not been undone. As a method, it works well. Now, the Big Bang theorists would say, no, right? Science, Bill Nye the Science Guy, working down the path where it all started, right? And all blew up one day. They've got these contrary positions. The methodology used for science is sound, and the method used for religion is sound. They have a difference of opinion. The findings are different, but the method is good. Science uses a fairly straightforward, direct hypothesis testing. Aristotle, which still stands today, used a null hypothesis to test it. So imagine, so there may be different reasons for the null hypothesis. They couldn't grasp what an atom was, but they said there must be something smaller than this that we can't see to make sense of this. So we try and prove that the world is just what we can see, feel, touch, smell, right? And it doesn't work. So that was the null hypothesis. The world is what I can see, feel, smell, touch. The perceptible world is all that matters. Existentialism, all this is it. And it doesn't work. So then the null hypothesis takes us to the other side and says, so we have to lead our mind to a new place. We have to maybe argue the opposite. Often in scientific research, when it is used, it's used to, if this doesn't work and we prove it doesn't work, it must be the opposite. So don't get too hung up on it. It's a concept you probably won't come across again, most of you, ever, maybe never, but it's valuable to understand a little bit about what it was, the difference between the null and the regular hypothesis. We're good with that? Now the variables that come in. So there's the dependent variable, the one that comes first. Sorry, no, don't write that down. Independent variable, the one that comes first.
Independent.
And we try to show that it causes the dependent one. So in that, then there's all the intervening variables. And we're going to look at Milgram here that I'm not allowed to post on YouTube, but we're going to do it anyways. In the Milgram one, we're going to look at, let's just go right to it. And who's going to be effective and what those variables look like. Just a sec, I got to stop the share and open another one. Woo! Oh, look at all you people. Oh, look at all those screens that I can't see. You all, this is where I get to play testy games. Jazzland, Jazzland. Oh, yeah, you're right. Pooja, Sonia. No response. There's like 6 of you. Oh yeah, 8 of you I can see, right? Unbelievable. I don't know why I come. Well, I do.
The online school is overwhelming. At the same time, it's interesting.
That's a different way. I hope so. All right, let me find the Milgram piece here. Milgram. Okay, so there's links on there for you to look at. They will open up. Oh, they open up again later, but for now, they open up, I think. Yeah, Unit 2, they open up. Oh, they'll open up later this week, but I'm going to show you the video anyways. Let's look. So, personal growth. We'll share the screen with you. And it'll take a second to open. Can you see that website there? Course website. So this will open up later in the week for you because, again, what I've got doing is these things open up. Oh, don't let somebody remind me at the very end to put all the labs together. So this will open up one at a time for you so you don't get overwhelmed. Because if you see all of these things posted now, you're going to say, you're already a bit overwhelmed. Next week, it'll all be just smooth. You'll be going boom, boom, boom. So, here we go, personal growth. So this is one of the websites to see it. There's two posted there, this or Daily Motion. Either will work. You're watching for we're going to watch about the first 10 minutes. So this is the Milgram experiment. It is not a, nobody gets an electric shock, so don't panic. It's if that's sort of close to home for some people, and it could be, nobody actually gets a shock. He set up a scenario where they believe they're administering a shock to someone, but they're actually not. Okay, the whole thing is rigged. So nobody is getting harmed in this, but Milgram becomes an ethical issue later, and we'll talk about why at the end of this. I want you to look at the variables. That's what I'm going to get you looking at here.
Are the videos testable material as well?
Oh, no. And not the video itself. The concepts I talk about that come out, that the video just gives you an example. They become testable. The audio is, oh, I know what happened. Oh, hang on a minute. I have a brainstorm. Ooh. I think I can send this for here.
The name.
You can hear that okay?
Yeah, it's really laggy.
Yes.
Introduced to another person who they believe is another volunteer. He's really an actor.
I'm Professor Lawrence.
As is the professor who'll be running the test.
Do you know what we're doing today?
Not specifically.
The volunteers are also unaware that they're being filmed. Social psychologist Dr. Clifford Stott will be monitoring their responses.
We're conducting an experiment into learning and behaviour.
The actor who's acting as the professor comes in and talks to the two participants to try and convince them that what's actually happening is this scientific study of memory rather than actually what it is, which is a scientific study of obedience to authority.
Description, good work.
Reveals that the experiment will involve a form of punishment. Each participant is given a specific role within the experiment.
So I'm asking one of you to be a teacher and one of you to be a learner.
The learner receives the shocks. The teacher applies them.
How do they decide who's the victim and who's the teacher? Well, that's done through a lottery, so they draw lots.
How does that work out? Teacher?
Of course, it's fixed, so the actual participant always ends up being the teacher.
So you must be teacher.
The subject.
I'm making it smaller. That'll won't clip then.
Electric shock device.
You can see that okay?
As it's called, gets to see all this. He gets to see that the man is restrained within the chair.
I think this is where the procedure starts to get really interesting, because it's now that the teacher begins to realise the potential consequences of what's going on.
How will I know how much pain he's feeling? Sorry, Nick.
Well, you won't. That's not really the point of the exercise. The point of the exercise is to see how he learns. It's the shock generator.
The teacher is then taken next door and shown the generator. which goes from 15 all the way up to a lethal 450 volts.
So variables are research
It's almost
subjects.
twice the mains voltage.
Look different.
Read those things.
Variable.
Teachers are given a list of word pairs. The learner is expected to memorize. Each time the learner gets a multiple choice question wrong, the teacher is told to increase the voltage of the shock.
Then just do that.
Okay, so we've got variables in who our research subjects are. And when you watch the faces that come through these videos, there's 3 of them, but we're only going to watch part of the second. When you watch them, look and see how much different they are and how much alike they are, because how good is your variable? You can have a very specific set of people you're doing your research on, but you need to explain that bias in your research and say, this is what who I'm researching and who and why, and identify it. Don't just leave it hanging. Because otherwise you'll be criticized for being biased. The other is, well, your research just becomes unreliable because it's biased. You can't say this speaks to everybody because they all seem to be the same. Could be gender, could be age, could be cultural background, whatever. So the other variables he's put in, he said when they get a question wrong, then they have to give the person electric shock. Do you do that at the same time always? It is always question number 12, question number 4. Do you randomize when that happens? Because what are you looking for? That becomes, so designing a research topic, how to do it is very difficult because you've got to think about, and it is the language of what could be different in this variable. So what you're trying to do in research with a hypothesis or the null hypothesis is take out all the intervening variables, all the things that might have an impact on it. You try and remove them one at a time. They get taken out, and so quantitative research does that. And then you get to say all that's left is the independent variable and the dependent variable, and one causes the other. But it's the removal of intervening variables that does that. Sometimes what we do in that is to set up a research project. We would set up an experiment and make sure we have different people of all different cultures for a reason to say this is cross-cultural. When you consider the way we look at language, we look at body language, that's different in different cultures. The same, this in Canada means peace, and Kosovo, they found out that it means the same as this. Imagine that. So on the way out, the Canadian troops think they've been there and helpful and nice, and on the way out, they're on the back door, peace out, man, happy. Right, that used to mean victory. In the 70s, it meant 2 more beer, and now it means peace. And on the way out, all the people were terribly offended by the Canadian troops. They thought we're friendly, and now they're doing what on the way out? So there was a whole lot of work had to be done to correct that. So the interpretation, what you want to do is bring in different variables into your research project so that you can say, no, it had no effect, it had no effect, it had no effect, it had no effect. That's what you do with all those little bits. That's why we have, and you're going to see it in the survey questions in a couple of weeks, why they ask you demographic questions. How old are you? Where do you live? That's to make sure we got a pool with lots of different variation, and we can say, here's the answer. So the independent variable in this, in Milgram, is authority. And the dependent variable is compliance. If directed by a person in authority, people will comply. That's the hypothesis. Because he's looking at the war, he's looking at Korea then, but World War II, and saying, this was 1961. And he said, there's all these people go off to war, they get conscripted, they have to go, but they're in the hole, they're shooting, they're killing people. It's not in us to kill, and they are. So why do they listen to the person who tells them? The interesting thing in this is they assumed everybody was shooting back. What we have since found out is anywhere between 50 and 70% of the people in the trenches in World War I and II weren't actually shooting. They were handing their bullets to the person beside them who was a better shot, who could take a life, because they couldn't deal, even though they're in that place of I could lose everything here, is they couldn't actually shoot. The thought of taking a life was too overwhelming for them. So something to consider, the assumption that went into his work that everybody was shooting back. Many weren't. Let's go back to here then. Some more variables.
See what it feels like.
To reinforce the subject's belief that the generator is real, they are given a 45-volt shock.
Don't get scared, right? Here we go.
Okay, yeah.
Significant?
Yeah, fairly. Not enough to kill me just yet, so that's okay.
When the procedure continues, there's an awareness clearly in the mind of the teacher that there is a potential for the victim to actually be experiencing quite high levels of pain.
Yellow flower, strong coffee.
The point of Milgram's experiment is to see if the teachers will call a stop to the test, or obey the professor and inflict extremely painful shocks. Belief that they're advancing science.
Fine. Please continue.
That was correct. Fast. Is it A, train, B, car, C, aeroplane, D, journey? Sorry, it's 195. If that's him shouting, I can't go on. Sorry.
Well, the thing is that the shocks do involve pain, but the experiment requires that you continue. So please go on.
There is no permanent tissue damage. It's important.
Sorry?
There is no permanent tissue damage.
I know, but I really don't want to. I don't.
Variable. So the things that scientist, who's an actor, but the things that scientists say affects is a variable. Does the scientist always say, and here's the thing, is if you want to say these people all respond the same way, you need to make sure, do you make sure that the way the scientist says it is always the same, or do you leave it flexible? So he says, you have to continue. It requires you to continue. Okay, that's a bit directive. And then there's a statement, there's no lasting tissue damage. Okay, that's a buy-in conversation. Think about bosses you've worked for. Good boss, not so nice boss, right? The nice boss you'll do anything for. The not so nice boss, you do what you have to. Directive authority doesn't often bring, it might get compliance, but it plays different. So watch and listen to the words that scientist says. And later on, we're going to come back to this in week 7. But look at the variations in that, because that's a variable. You either control it or you don't. So he says in this, you've got, the other one is, what if we change that scientist? Instead of changing our research subjects, what if it's a different scientist? What if the scientist was a woman instead of a man, younger instead of older, in a suit or in some other clothing instead of a lab coat, not some old white guy with gray hair and half glasses who, right? Like, what does that mean? Is that, did that weigh into, is it just the role that's adopted? Is that sort of seen as sort of a soft form of authority and people went along with it? Or is there something even in the way he presents that impacts this? That's an intervening variable. So I see the scientist as a variable that I want to be able to answer for.
I want to give pain like this.
Please just continue.
Okay, Nick. If you're happy to continue, we'll carry on. No, I'm not, I can't go on. I can't go on. Sorry, I'm going to have to give up because we're not going to do this.
I fully understand the
experiment requires that you go on.
Sorry, Nick, that was wrong. It's 225 volts. I'm going to press it quickly. If you don't want to go on, you don't have to press the next button.
Let me out! Well, hot dog is bothering me now.
Right, okay, listen, I can hear. I can't go on.
Are you terminated?
Yes.
We're going to pop into the next one. So we saw a little variation there, right? We're going to just watch a couple of minutes of this next one. So Milgram is the typical experimental psychological project. These people didn't know what they were agreeing to. They agreed to come and help in a research project, And they agreed on a point of view of I'm helping someone testing to see if somebody learns and does pain work for them. They knew what they're doing. They're pressing the button and causing pain, but they didn't know they're the research subject. Collaborators or resources? Did Milgram see them as a collaborator or as a resource?
Resource.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a collaborator, I tell you what we're doing. In a relationship, I tell you what's going on, so you get to make choice, right? We're both in it together. If I don't tell you, I've held it back, that's not a free-flowing, informed position, and it's not a collaboration, it's a resource, making use of somebody for something. So let's look at a little bit more of the second piece here.
What the participants don't know is that the learner hasn't been receiving any shocks at all.
Let me out! Let me out of here! Let me out!
His responses are being played on a pre-recorded CD.
Stop! Let me out of here! Let me out of here! Let me out!
When I get to intense shock, and then extreme intensity shock, and then dangerous severe shock, I need to stop really, don't I?
Well,
experiment requires that you continue.
What about in dangerous severe shock, and then the XXX?
Well,
please continue the experiment. Thank you.
See, different language?
The participant here deferring to the professor.
Yes.
And that deferring to the professor carries with it a diffusion of responsibility.
So here's the descriptive work here. So he's got a little bit of analysis, but for the most part, he's describing what's going on. And that's good. I said last week, good social research. You describe and then you analyze later.
Responsibility for this is not entirely hers, so much as it is to the authority figure that resides with her in the room.
We're on danger now.
Yeah.
But you say it won't be really dangerous to him.
There's no lasting tissue damage.
So a different set of variables in that. He's thought differently, or his response may well impact the way people respond to him. And where am I? PowerPoints. How they respond to his authority may vary because of what he said and how he said it. Intervening variables. So we're clear on that. We've got independent, dependent, and intervening clear in your head. Are we good back on the, you can see the slide again? PowerPoints, yeah. Good, thank you. Okay. So Miller makes a real clean space in what do we recognize? Blind obedience is that people will just do as they're told mostly. The medical advancement one, individual harm. So let's go back to the HIV thing. HIV crisis in the 90s. So HIV crisis in the 90s is, they're doing research. They want to figure out, there's a lot of people, a lot of African countries have significant numbers of HIV, right? There's a concern for that. Now it came out here, HIV breaks, it breaks out, it becomes AIDS very quickly. It's seen as a life sentence. HIV is not that anymore. It's an ailment. It's a difficult thing to live with, but you live with it as people live with diabetes, as people live with other physical difficulties. It's now that. So it's treatable, can live long, productive lives. But at the time, it wasn't seen that way. So it was something they had to get to. Now, interesting, consider this. And here again goes back to bias. Initially, when in the West, there's some thought of when AIDS hits, HIV, then AIDS, and then we hear about the HIV crisis in African countries, it's like, well, it's a sexually transmitted disease. That's how it's seen here in Canada. Sexually transmitted disease. So therefore, it is that assumption is carried over to me. No.
No, you're breaking out.
You're breaking up, sir.
Okay, okay, see if it picks up, and give me a second, it should come back. Low system resources. Oh. Too many things open.
It seems like it's back to normal now.
Okay, thank you. So that crisis that we see going on there, initially in the West is sort of seen as it's connected to sexuality because it's a sexually transmitted disease here. That's the way it is. What we learned, because some researcher, I'm going to bet any money on, I don't know for sure, but I'm going to bet this out. Somebody's over there, medical person, watching what's going on, watching treatment. People are being lined up to get a needle for things that we can get a needle for, maybe cholera or what else do you get injections for? A lot of us have gotten a little needle in our arm, right? There's an injection. That's not because aliens came down and touched you when you were a baby, right? It's an inoculation from when you were little to prevent those ailments or those viruses from taking hold in our body. So what they realized is somebody's there and said, they're not washing the needles well enough. And the needle, not the metal needle, they're not reusing needle tips, but the vial where the material is put in aren't glass anymore. They're in plastic. Plastic's cheaper than glass, and they're washing them. Well, you can't really wash out plastic as well as you think. Anybody had one of those Tupperware, whatever, plastic bowls, and you put something in with a bit of oil in it and try and get that oil out of that bowl? How hard is that to do? Those vials don't clean out very well. And they realize HIV is spread by a whole bunch of people, Western medicine, who is over there to give inoculations for other potentially deadly or just limiting life viruses, and they're passing HIV through those needles. They realize a big bunch of the spread of HIV is not at all to do with sex. It's about the medical model helping it along by accident. They all meant to do well, but they passed it on. So that thing, but somebody broke out of the mindset, because somebody there is also looking saying, there's a lot of really religious people here. This doesn't make sense. All this sexually transmitted disease doesn't make sense given this world. So there's that, somebody broke out of thinking like a sheep and just going along and said, what's going on here? And we got out of it. HIV, so what they do you go in. So you think, pharmaceutical companies, right? They're the ones who come up with it. They're the ones that get it sent over there. The pharmaceutical companies show up. And so in this process before it, they want to do research. They found a pill they think it'll prevent HIV. This is making this one up, but I want it to be serious enough. They've decided that they found a pill that will prevent HIV from getting from an expectant mother to their child. So it's a big deal, right? We're all expectant mothers with HIV. If some company comes in and says to us in our little village of 100, or if we do all the classes, 400 of us, and say to us, we have a cure that will prevent your child from having this disease, this virus, and we have it, and if you just take it, but we got to do research. We've checked it on goats, rats, pigs, like mice, rats, worked our way up, goats, pigs. It works on everything, but we got to do human trials, and that's where we're at right now with COVID-19, right? They're in human trials. So when they do human trials, they say, we're going to try it out in your village. There's a lot of it here. So we want to take blood samples. We want you to take the pill every day for the next 3 months. And then we're going to take blood samples all the way along. Will you sign up? Think about it. Would you sign up or would you say no? Would you want your sister or mother or daughter to sign up for that? Or would you say, So the control sample, this is what the control sample looks like. They would take one, let me get rid of the stop share. I have another picture we're going to do. Let's go to this one. Oh, didn't work. I was trying to show all the pictures. Didn't work. So in the control sample, you would have a whole set of people so let's call it our village. We would see, I have an idea. A whole bunch of people. and we would take them and say, here's what, these are the people that are untouched by this. They don't have it, they're just living there, existing, and they're untouched. So I will go with the stamp. So there's a bunch of people here. This is the untouched normal community. And then I take, so this is all one big village, right? And then I take another set and I say, okay, you bunch, we're going to make you the control sample. You agreed to join in the experiment. So there's a bunch of agreed to the experiment. The control group doesn't get the pill. They're given a placebo. They're given a little sugar pill. It looks the same, but it's not the real one. So this group, at the end of our research, should look the same as this. Their children, and in this case, their children would be born with HIV. Then you get the third group, and this group was called the treatment group, and that's the one we saw in our, when you see that language in the book, the treatment group, they're the ones who get whatever the treatment could be being nice, the treatment could be getting medication, the treatment could be being the one that is pressing that button. So the treatment group will get the medication. And what we expect to see in our hypothesis is this medication will prevent HIV going to the unborn child. So at the end of the research, we will expect to see all of their children born with no HIV. We expect them to be born with HIV, the same as this group. But then what happens when one of these ends up, who took the sugar pill, ends up over here? Their child's born without HIV. So in our hypothesis test, in a typical medical model, and that's how it's done, control group. What about the side effects to this group? What if there is? Well, unfortunate. This group, though, they actually, the control group got the placebo. They're all right. This group might clear the HIV, but they might have other terrible ailments. They might, that they didn't see coming, because when they did human trials, they had a side effect to the medication. Medical model, we see that enough. Anybody seen the advertising where they say, or heard them where they say, here's the pill, take this pill, but if you have high blood pressure, if you're over 25, if you're, right, they give you all that list of, if you're any of these things, then consult your doctor. We got it because it's prescription anyways in Canada, but still, it's the idea that what they're doing is protecting themselves against liability. So this one person, and here's what's interesting in the medical model, and this is just the way my mind thinks, because I never stop with the research thoughts, curiosity. The person, the child that's born without HIV who came from this area, our medical model can't explain. We're only 150 years old. There might be some herbal or homeopathic, there might be something that this has happened over here or over here that caused a person to, that essentially solved it for them. It's 4,000-year-old medicine, maybe. Some of those things are that old. They've been tested and tested. They got tested by accident. They didn't test like this. What they tested is, he ate that plant, but he died. Don't eat that plant anymore, you'll die. But then somebody had fell into a pot and they realized it was boiling in the pot of something they said, holy mackerel, that was really good for you. If you boil it, now we call it tea. So medical model doesn't have all the answers, but they certainly present it to us as they have the answers. Something to consider when they do that. That is almost all done in hypothesis testing. So there are things we're going to do in this course. We're going to look at, press that button. We're going to bump through a bunch of different methods. So like the HIV one, who do we survey? I would say the public. Some questionnaires you do by written, some are telephone. The interview you do, it's personal, it's appropriate to do that. And then we're going to run through all these different methods over the course. We ask ourselves why. Why is this method appropriate? Why am I choosing it? It might be, so go back to that learning style inventory I said. The reason for using this method might be just because you like it. It works for you. You're comfortable doing it. Don't do something you're uncomfortable with, because you may not do a good job. Unless you're up for the challenge. If you like the idea, it'll challenge you. Then you'll get better at it as you do it. But if it really is something that intimidates you, don't do it, because your research may be flawed in it. So you're asking what risks might arise out of your investigation. And you're also asking who incurs that risk. And that is what the ethics boards do. That's all they do. They don't care what your project looks like. They don't look at the quality of the project. They look at who's in harm's way. Milgram showed us informed consent. It's not enough that they agreed to press the buttons in the experiment. They needed to know that what they were doing, and they needed to know what their role was, so it was truly informed. Out of Milgram, that's the big lesson we get out of it. It's seen as this big unethical experiment because he did not get informed consent from his people. He got consent, but not informed. They didn't really know. Lying is not okay. Deception is not acceptable in research. So simply, those two aren't. There's Milgram. Confidentiality is another issue. If you promise people you'll keep their identity secret, that means you will keep their identity. It doesn't mean you'll hide their name. It means you'll protect me. If we did research, you decided to do research and say, what do you think of Guelph Humber? And you interview everybody in the room, or you do a little survey. And I say, I think it sucks. It's a horrible place, blah, blah, right? I'm all negative. And then you say, so you publish your report. You don't put my name in it. You don't say the professor. You just say the male over the group that is male over the age of 30 think it's a terrible place. Oh, imagine that. I'm the only guy over 30. You just disclosed who I am by accident, and you're going to be responsible for it. This Wigmore test is an important term to know. It is a Supreme Court of Canada case that says, if you promise me confidentiality, you better stand up to it. If you promise me and you give up my name, or you give up enough information, they figure out who I am and I get fired, you get to pay my salary. That's how it works. You will be held responsible for whatever cause comes from your work, which is ultimately the same causality as what we do in research, trying to show independent variable causes the dependent. The courts will look and say, did your action cause me to lose something? Yeah, you pay for it. Causality, same issue in law as it is in research. So, and that is, so the last little thought here, peer review, that comes in. Funding approval, ethics review, these groups that do this help to make sure you're on the right track. So, and that is my view of doing hypothesis research with hypothesis testing. Thoughts? Yes, no, good. Carry on. Had enough? We just went an hour and a half straight. Right? Did we? No. Holy mackerel. Yeah. So the other lectures, this one, if you watch the one that I put up there, will look like this. Little variations, but minor. And if you want to, so next week will be the same. Whether you come in, and that's why I think it's just as easy, because this is how it goes. There's not really any questions. So I will talk about archives next week. You will have done it. You'll hear what I have to say, and then go on that discussion board and have a little chat about it. You'll learn a ton from the chat room, because typically the lectures are me talking and you sitting there quietly listening, right? Or going to sleep, depends. I think I saw somebody sleeping. I heard snoring. Who was it? Holly, did you leave? Are you sleeping? Oh no. So
I was just eating, that's why.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good. So that's what I think. It probably is easier for you if you follow that timeline I've got set up. So now every week is in order. It's all set up. Everything opens for you Sunday to be able to do the chapter, do the test, do the quiz on it, do the lab, look at my video after you've done the lab. So how many of you would do your hypothesis different? Would you rewrite it? No, you're not going to, because you all get the grade. Would you redo it now? Have you got a little different sense of it? Or might you just tweak it a bit differently? How about the null hypothesis you tried to write, which was probably craziness for you? But right now, do you think you would you be able to do that clean? Could you use your hypothesis, your statement that you used for the hypothesis? Could you use that same statement and try and prove it's wrong and use it as a null?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were kind of confused.
Good.
Like me and Benny were kind of confused. We were talking to each other about which way, like which one should go where. And then, so we might have done it.
Hang on a minute. What do you mean you're talking to each other? You're talking to my class?
We're BFFs, sir. We talk all day long.
So if you've done that, so it doesn't matter what your words are.
So,
what
for
the difference
example,
is,
sorry, because the way I did mine, okay, my hypothesis was when raised by a single parent, children are less successful in the future. But I wanted to prove that wrong. So my null hypothesis was being a single parent is irrelevant to the success of their children in the future. So I don't know.
okay, so say your first one. What was the hypothesis?
The first one was when raised by single parent, children are less successful in the future. But I wanted to prove that that's wrong.
So should that be the null?
If you're trying to prove it's wrong, is that null then?
That should have been my null. And then my
You're
null
showing
should have
that
been my
it's
hypothesis.
right. You're kicking it out. You're dismissing it, throwing out of the thought. So you can say, okay, and then now what? And then you get to do your new one. So your new one would become your, in your next project, a hypothesis, right?
But technically, because when I wrote it, you didn't know my thoughts of it. So I would have done it correct if I was trying to prove that being a single parent, children are less successful, right?
That's good. Okay. If you understand the differences in between the two is how you think about it, then you're in a good place. If you realize that if you're trying to prove it's correct, then it's hypothesis. And if you're going to prove it's wrong, if your intent, not what the outcome is, not does it work out, your intent going in is to prove that it's false, then that's the null hypothesis. Because if you prove that it's false, then you get to throw it out and now think about something new.
Okay.
Can I say?
The null is about being able to nullify it, get rid of it. It doesn't have any standing here. It doesn't matter what the sentence is. It matters your mindset of it.
Can I say something quickly, John?
Yeah, John.
Okay, so my hypothesis, I just thought about it now, would be getting a formal education would give you a great future. Well,
okay, that's good.
So
could you prove that's false?
Well,
or could you prove it? Could you try to prove that it's false?
Of course, because I could find people that don't have formal education and they have good lives too.
Right. So so your one sentence could be used either way, couldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's it. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So either my preconceived idea, my bias, or my perception on life could lead me on that statement to want to review it in either way.
Yeah. So getting a formal education does not necessarily get you a great future or give you a great future.
So what you would, in doing that, if I was dissecting that, I would dissect it to say, what does good life mean? You'd have to define the term good life. Formal education, what does that mean? You'd have to define that term because that's your independent variable. So what do you mean by formal and what education? What is education?
Getting a degree and then good life, it's like middle class, like standard of living, better standard of living. How do I put that? That's kind of vague. I'm trying to put it in a better.
That's good. No, that works. That's good. But it's that you would have to have in your head what you mean by it, and you would end up writing that into it to make it tighter. Mm-hmm. That's good. So at this point, I don't need you to do it. You're not doing a research project. So I just need you to sort of play with the idea a little bit. Say, oh, okay, that's it. Oh, I like it. I don't like it. And then move on. Now you're going to think about, so you can talk a bit more about it this week, but then next week you're into archival. It's a new line of thought and a new method. And it's just that when you're finished the course, you might say, I will never write a hypothesis again. It's
one more question. So, because for part 4, you said that we had to prove which one's the positive and which one's the negative research. So did you mean like which one gives out the positive statement, which one's a negative statement? Because that's kind of how I interpret it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you don't have to, it's which one are you thinking you're trying to prove? So your first one, if you're trying to prove that it's false, then that's a null hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be negative.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just you didn't need to put, like your wording had nothing negative in it. It's a positive statement, but you're showing that that positive statement's no good, right?
Got it. Thank you.
Mindset. Don't make it bigger than it has to be. I am taking all of this stuff and making it as absolutely simple as I can so that treat it as a simple little step lesson so it doesn't become overwhelming. If you were to go on to grad school and do research and you wanted to try it, then you can dig in deeper into what the hypothesis thing is about, or you could pick. But for now, a little exposure says, okay, I understand what this is about, moving on.
Yep.
This whole course is meant to be a little exposure, moving on. You've thought about it and you're comfortable.
Yep.
And that's it. So, good. So for next week, watch the video directly on your own, and then we'll come in and use this as a, if you want to get some clarity on stuff, because there's really no point me doing the lecture exactly the same as what you're going to see online. So have a look at it, and it opens up on the Sunday. Have a look at it, and then come in. If you need, come in here and say, hey, what about this? What about that? We'll make it a what if session if you like.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
So what's due now?
It should ease your learning. You can do it when you like. Sorry?
Don't mind me. I'll print out the outline. I just asked a silly question. I'm just gonna.
No, that's not silly.
Yeah, I'm gonna print out the outline so I can know exactly, the timeline and
dates. Follow that little thing, that one I put on the website. Follow that announcements board. Where'd I put it? Just a sec. Too many things open. Where'd it go? Oh, it's in this one. Just a sec. This one. Follow the announcement that I put up here. This set of 10. It'll keep it simple for you. Do this stuff and just treat it as little step, little step, little step. And then I will, and I'll be here if there's any you want to go over some questions, you got some extra thoughts on it, then I'm here to bounce those back and forth. Okay?